Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
It's good to be here with you, Vic.
Christian, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm 26 years old. I was raised in North Alabama. That'll be pretty much where I've been my entire life and where I was raised. And I spent some time in the military. Now I'm a civilian and trying to get back to civilian life.
Christian, you're not one of those people who is a stranger to the wilderness. You've spent quite a bit of time out there. If you don't mind, I'd like to devote some time here having you explain the kind of things that you've done out in the woods.
Well, my grandfather owned a lot of horses. He had a lot of land out in the country out here in North Alabama. So pretty much we raised horses, which was actually deep out in the woods. He owned a lot of land out there. So when I was younger, we used to go camping. And when I say camping, I mean we just took a small tent, had bonfires, made s'mores and hot dogs, and spent several days out there. That was pretty much all we had for recreation in that area. Being in the military, I've also spent a lot of time being out in the woods there, too. It's pretty much been a huge part of my life. I'm no stranger to being out in the woods and seeing all the wildlife at all. It was a part of my everyday life for probably about 20 years being out in the woods.
When someone comes forward and says that they've had a dogman encounter, it seems like the typical response from most people out there is to try and explain it away. Okay, this person doesn't know what they saw. Maybe they saw a squirrel, saw a wolf, you name it. Anything but a dogman. With you, it's obvious that you've got more than enough experience out there in the woods to know if you did see something that was out of the ordinary, such as a dogman.
Yes, I've seen raccoons, coyotes, and deer. Pretty much those are the only larger animals that we have in this area. We have armadillos and we have rattlesnakes that you have to look out for. And I've seen it all pretty much out here that there is to see, I felt like, until I had my encounter.
Yeah, if you think about it, what out there in the woods is going to look like a dogman when it's up on its two legs doing what it's doing? Nothing. So that idea that someone had a case of mistaken identity, it just doesn't hold water. With most people, seeing a dogman would be traumatic enough on its own, but something happened in your childhood that makes the prospect of seeing a dogman even worse. Tell us about what happened to you.
Well, when I was about 10 years old, I was with my cousin. He actually lives really close by over in the next subdivision. We used to get off the bus together every day, and that week at school we had gotten a fundraiser that they had talked to us about, and, they tell you that, you sell so many items out of this book, you might get a prize or you might get some cash, and, you just pick what you'd want as a prize for how many ever items you sold. So that was a big enough incentive for us at the time because we didn't really have many stores in the area that you could go and get toys and things like that. I think the closest Walmart was even about 30 miles away, so it was kind of a big deal for us, and we were really excited about it. Well, we decided that we were going to go door to door, and we were going to ask all of our neighbors if they wanted to buy anything out of our catalogs, and so we take off walking together, and we saw some dogs barking in a backyard, one of our neighbors' houses. We weren't too worried about it because they were behind the fence. Well, we started walking, and then they came running out from the fence. Apparently the gate had been left open. There was a Doberman and a chow. They grabbed a hold of my cousin. They tore him up pretty bad on his thigh. He had to get several stitches. They drug him to the ground, and then he fought them off, and he got up, and he continued running straight to his house, which is not far from where we were. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there. It wasn't a fight or flight response. I was just shocked that it had happened, and as soon as he took off, they turned their attention on to me, and they got a hold of me and dragged me to the ground. The chow had a hold of my leg, and the Doberman actually grabbed me by my neck and proceeded to drag me down the side of the road by my neck. I grabbed onto a mailbox as it was pulling me through the ditch. Lucky for me, I was on my stomach the entire time, but the dogs got on top of me and started biting just ferociously on my back. They tore me up pretty good. My cousin, when he had gotten to his house during this time, he went into his house in a panic and told his older brother what had happened. He didn't realize that I was still outside. He grabbed his gun and ran out the door, and he saw both of the dogs on top of me. He didn't want to shoot at the dogs in case he missed, so he shot up into the air. The dogs took off running, and he dragged me into a close-by neighbor's house, and they called an ambulance, and I spent several weeks in the hospital and had to have a blood transfusion, and it was just a really horrific situation. When I got back from the hospital, at that time we had a miniature pinscher. She was only about 5 or 6 pounds, but we had her for several years. When I got home from the hospital, I was still having night terrors, and I would wake up screaming, and she would jump up on my bed, and because of her jumping up on the bed and looking exactly like the dog that had attacked me, except obviously much smaller, it just made the nightmares a lot worse. And as sad as it was, and as attached as we were to her, we ended up having to give her away because I was just completely traumatized by the entire situation.
Oh, that's horrible. I can only imagine what that must have been like. I've had some close calls, but luckily never had a situation where they followed through. The fact that after that happened, you have been able to have dogs. I know you had a pit bull when one of these incidents happened, and you had a Rottweiler when another one happened when you were younger. The fact that you actually were able to own dogs after going through something like that, that says a lot about your constitution. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, I've always been an animal lover. Actually, when my mom received the phone call that there had been an accident with the dog attack, they didn't want to give her too much detail. They didn't want her to rush home from work in a panic, so they told my mother, she's been bitten by a dog. She's on her way to the hospital. Well, she thought in her mind that probably what would have happened is that I went up and tried to pet a dog that wasn't that friendly. So if that says anything about how much of an animal lover that I was, that's just the way that I was.
Yeah, I'm an animal lover too. I can't imagine not having animals in my life the same way apparently you wouldn't want to live your life without having them in it. I'm just still so surprised that after having something like that happen, you're able to have big, powerful dogs like that Rod and the pit bull that we're going to be talking about tonight. Speaking of those incidents, about 2 years after that, when you were 12, you had a strange experience in the woods. Please tell us about that.
Well, before the incident with the dog attack happened, we also had a Rottweiler. We had him for several years, and he was just kind of like the guardian of, I guess, our yard. He took care of things, let us know if people were around, but it was my job to go to the barn and feed the horses, which was probably about a mile and a half from our house, but it was deep back in the woods, so I would come home and let him out of the yard, and he would follow me down to the barn. Well, he always stayed by my side. He never ran off or anything like that, so we never really had a reason to have a leash on him or a collar or anything like that. So this particular day, we go to leave to go to the barn, and he just took off ahead of me, which was really odd, but he just took off in a full-blown sprint. Me being about 12 years old, I'm thinking, I've got to catch my dog. Is he going to run off? What's going on? So I take off after him, and we go way past the barn. I'm still trying to catch up with him, and then we ended up on a game trail. This wasn't like a gravel road. We were far off of the gravel road. This was just a game trail, and when I say that, I mean it's just probably big enough of a trail for a deer to walk through. It would be hard for two people walking side by side to even fit because of how thick the woods are. So he lays down in the middle of this game trail, and I thought that was odd. I thought if he was chasing something, he wouldn't just stop like that. He wouldn't just lay down. As I'm walking up to him, I realized that the woods are completely silent. All of a sudden, it's starting to get dark, and we don't hear anything. You could have probably heard a pin drop out there, but I was more worried at the time about how far we had gotten off of the main trail, because I knew the woods out there, but I wasn't quite sure of where we were. We made so many turns, and it was starting to get dark, because I had followed him for probably an hour, maybe two. I'm not really sure. It was a really long time ago, but I knew that I was worried about how we would get home. Well, I finally had to pretty much pick him up because he was dead set about laying down, which was odd, but I finally got him up. I got him to start walking with me. When we start walking, there was like a ridge above us and kind of like an embankment down below us. But up on the ridge, I could hear rustling like something following us. At first, I thought it might just be a squirrel or something like that. But then I started to notice I started hearing it down on the other side on the embankment. We walked for a really long time with that going on. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I didn't really know why at the time, because the area that we lived in, we didn't have anything really that we had to look out for besides snakes, and coyotes usually don't come up to you, so that wasn't really anything that was in my mind at all. But it definitely felt like something was following us. Well, we keep walking. It's already dark, and I'm starting to panic. And the whole time that we were walking, we still hear what sounded like footsteps trailing us. Eventually, we got to a point where there was a clearing, and I had no idea where we were, but we decided to walk out there and try to catch our bearings, figure out where we were, and we end up in someone's backyard. We walk through their backyard up to the front, and we see a road. I realized where the road was actually several miles away from our house. The place that we lived at was so remote that even if we would have had a cell phone, we would have had no reception at all. So our only choice was just to walk. So we walked back home. Shortly after that, I'm not sure how long after that, maybe weeks, maybe months, but I got out of school and went to go feed the horses. Well, I had taken a golf cart that we had that my grandfather wasn't using at the time, and I decided that I was going to ride that to the barn and feed the horses. When I pulled up to the barn every day, the horses would hear the golf cart or us walking on the gravel road, and they would leave the pasture that they were in and come up to the barn to be fed. I guess the sound of the tires on the gravel was kind of like a dinner bell for them. So they knew to come at that point. Well, this particular day I get there, I pull up inside the barn, and the horses haven't come up to the barn at all. And I thought that was odd. Well, I sat there and I had a whistle that I would blow to get their attention sometimes if they were really far out there, and I blew it, and still nothing. At that point, I'd gotten really frustrated, so there was a gate on the opposite side of the barn that would open up for me to drive the golf cart, or if we needed to drive a truck, we could just open up that gate and get inside there and go check on the horses. So I decided that's what I was going to do. Before I backed the golf cart up, I just decided, since there were no horses around, I would go ahead and go around the side of the barn and unlock the gate, get the golf cart in there, close it back, and just go find out what was up with the horses. Well, I walk around the side of the barn and I see, crouched down in front of the gate right next to the barn, I saw what looked like a huge, huge black dog. But it looked kind of like the fur thickness of, I guess, what a German Shepherd would be, but much, much larger. I had my Rottweiler at the time, and looking at this, I just realized this is bigger than any dog that I've ever seen before. But what scared me the most was the stance that it had. Looked like a cat when it's about to pounce. It was crouched down. I never saw it stood up. I don't know much about the leg structure at all. All I knew was that this thing just looked completely massive. But it didn't look at me like, it didn't look at me like it wanted to attack me. It looked at me more like, yeah, I'm here, and I kind of want to, I guess, intimidate you out of my area. It looked at me like, don't come any closer. It looked like it was about to, like it could have sprung forward and been on me in a second if it wanted to. I was, of course, in shock. I'd never seen anything like this before. So instead of running back to the golf cart, I just slowly backed away from it, because the stance that it was in, I know how a cat or a dog operates. I know if you take off running, there's going to be a prey drive. I knew that even then, so I slowly backed away, got back into the barn, got on the golf cart, and I took off, and I went back home after that.
In that area of northern Alabama, do you have any bears, or did you have any bears back then?
No, there's never, as far as I've known, and even talking to my grandfather, we were actually really close, and he had told me that he had never heard of any bears being out in that area. I had told him about what I saw, and he thought, he didn't really say a whole lot about it. He didn't react quite how I wanted him to. He didn't act like he didn't believe me, but he kind of acted like, I don't really think we should be talking about this. I'm thinking because of the dog attack I had earlier, I'm thinking maybe he thought I'd blown it out of proportion, I guess. That maybe it looked bigger to me than what it really was. But nonetheless, he had told me that he had never seen or heard of anything that big being out there, and definitely not any bears.
Can you describe how its head looked a little better?
It looked like around the head, it looked like it had tufts of fur that stuck out, I guess, like, kind of like what a husky or a Malamute or an Akita would look. Like it's got the puffy face, or it was like block shaped, but it had like tufts of fur that stuck out on the sides, and it had the ears a lot like a German Shepherd would be, They stuck straight up, but they didn't stick off to the side. They stuck straight up. You know how a German Shepherd sometimes the way the head is shaped, sometimes they stick off like kind of at a 45-degree angle off their head. These looked more straight up than that. I saw the shoulders. Well, they weren't shoulders, but it looked like the upper body of this thing was just huge. It looked way more broad than the shoulders of my Rottweiler, and the head was probably 2 to 3 times the size of his head. And I knew by looking at it that it was something absolutely huge. At first, when I saw it, I thought bear, but the shape of the head and the body was not right for that. I've just never seen anything like that large. Of course, we had horses. I would say, compared to the size of the horses, it crouched down like that. Probably come up to about half the height, just crouched down. If that makes any sense.
Ooh, that's pretty big. Yeah, that couldn't have been a good sight to see. What can you tell us about the way its muzzle looked?
Well, if you think about the muzzle of a German Shepherd, it wasn't really like that. It looked longer than the muzzle of a German Shepherd, but it looked so much broader. Like if you think of the muzzle of like what a Rottweiler would be, if you stretched that out a little bit and made it more broad, it would be more of that shape, if that makes any sense. I didn't see any teeth, but I saw the muzzle and it just looked really, really broad and long.
Yeah, that's really scary. With a muzzle like that, it's going to have some tremendous biting power.
Yeah.
You told me that when you were young, at night your family would hear something that sounded kind of like a woman screaming. What can you tell us about that?
Well, with us living so close to the woods like that, we used to sit outside on the front porch sometimes, and even sometimes we would hear it from inside the house with the TV on. It sounded like a woman screaming, and it used to really scare me, especially when I was much younger, and my grandmother always just told me that that was the sound that a bobcat makes. But we heard it all the time. It was more than just a regular thing. We would hear coyotes also, but we knew that that didn't sound like a woman screaming like what we heard out in the woods. But she had always told me that that was just the sound of bobcats. Even though I had never seen one out there, I'm sure there are some out there, but I've never seen one make that scream. I'm not totally sure of what it would sound like to hear it, but I know it was just loud enough to be heard over the TV or over us cooking dinner and talking and stuff like that. We would hear it from inside the house.
Yeah, that had to be a pretty shocking thing to experience. I know foxes and bobcats can make noises that are pretty freaky sounding. Considering the activity that you've had in that area, it sure makes you wonder if maybe it was a fox or a bobcat that was making that sound, or something else like what you saw back behind the barn that day. I guess we'll never know. All we can do is guess about that. Before we move on to your next experience, I want to bring up something. Mike was our guest a few weeks ago from the Huntsville area. You said that you're pretty close to where he was talking about. Is that correct?
Yes, actually now I do live in Huntsville. Where this encounter that I just spoke about happened was Skyline, Alabama, off of County Road 17. In Mike's interview, he talked about Paint Rock Valley, which really got my attention because Huntsville is about 45 minutes to an hour from Skyline, and from Huntsville to Paint Rock Valley is about 20 or 30 minutes, and it's right in the middle of these two places.
Ooh, so you're right in the heart of it then.
Yes.
For some time now, I've known that there's been quite a bit of activity in that area. It does seem like it must be some kind of a hot spot for them, unfortunately. You had an encounter in the South Huntsville area. What happened?
Well, when I got out of the military, I was used to having battle buddies and people with me all the time, and once I got out, I guess I decided that I kind of wanted to be off by myself somewhere. Being so comfortable in the woods, I actually got on Craigslist and found a cabin in South Huntsville off of Ditto Landing Road. I liked the area. I went to go see the house, and I noticed that it was so close to Ditto Landing Marina, and I knew that I would love that because I love to go fishing, and I had my two dogs at the time, and I thought, you know, we could walk from our house to the lake every day in the summer and go swimming or go fishing, and I thought that was just great. So the cabin that I got was well within my price range, and I thought it was great. It was actually on a gravel road, and there was only myself and one neighbor on this road. So it was really secluded. From where the front porch is, off to the side of the front porch, about probably not even 20 feet is where the tree line starts. And in the backyard, probably about 50 feet behind the back porch is where the tree line starts there. So they cleared it off in that kind of a shape back there so that I would have a backyard to fence in if I wanted to, but there were trails up behind the cabin that I had, and that's pretty much what sold me on getting this cabin. I thought it was great, so I moved in, and within 3 days, I think it was the third day that I was actually living there, my family came and helped me get everything set up, and I brought my dogs over there. I had just adopted a St. Bernard Dalmatian mix from the local shelter. For several years, I had a brindle pit bull. He was really large. Nothing ever spooked him, which kind of worried me sometimes, but he was just always really sure of himself. Well, on my third day living there, I worked night shifts, so I would get up in the mornings and we would walk to the lake, or we would go in the trail behind the house and we would just go walk. We did that. I went to work. I got home at about 3 o'clock in the morning. So when I would get home, I would let my dogs out, and I had some lead lines tied up in the front yard. Well, because there was only myself and one neighbor on this road, it was so rural that we didn't even receive mail out there. The mail trucks don't even run out there. We obviously didn't have any street lights, so it was really dark. We had just installed a floodlight porch light on the front porch that was a motion sensor, so that when I would get off work that late, and it was so dark because of the trees, that when I would walk up on the porch, the light would come on and I could see to get my keys out and unlock the door. So that just kind of describes the area. But anyway, I got home at about 3 o'clock in the morning. I let the dogs out on their lead lines, and I heated up some food. I ate dinner, and I started doing the dishes. Well, when I started doing the dishes, I noticed that my pit bull was just absolutely losing his mind barking out in the front yard. And I thought that was odd because we have so many small animals around. It's really not like him to be barking that aggressively. I was kind of worried about our neighbor down the road being woken up by it, so I was really frustrated. So I came out the front door, and he was just barking in this one direction. I couldn't really see that well because the way that my motion detector light was set up, it just lit up just the front of the house. But off to the sides, it was still very dark. So he was still barking and snarling and just uncontrollably. I tried yelling at him from the porch. He wouldn't stop. So I got even more frustrated, and I walked down the steps to where he was, and I pretty much had to straddle myself on top of him and grab a hold of his collar because I was afraid that he was going to break his cable that he was attached to. I yelled at him to stop. He wouldn't stop, and he was just thrashing around. So I swatted at him several times, just, I guess, like spanking him like you would with a newspaper on his hindquarters. He just wouldn't stop it. He acted like he didn't even feel it and that he didn't care that I was there. After about 30 seconds of wrestling with him and trying to get him to stop, I decided, well, what is he absolutely losing his mind over? I stuck my head right above his to look in the area that he was looking at, and I saw a dark figure. And at first, when I saw it, I thought, this is a huge man in all black with a hood on, because all I could really see was the shape because of the darkness. But when I looked down at the road, I realized that it was a lot closer than what I thought it was, thus making it a lot bigger than what I thought it was. And when I looked at it, I thought, you know, I've got a friend that's about 6'11", and looking at the size of this thing, I thought, this is not a person. And it just stood there, and it looked in our direction. And if it would have been a person, I would have unhooked my dog, and I would have let him go after whoever it was, because they would have had no business being out there. But because I didn't know what it was, I ran to where my St. Bernard was, which she was hiding under the porch. I unhooked her, got her inside the house, and then I ran back out there to get my pit bull. The figure hadn't moved. It was still standing there, but slightly hunched over at that point. It was incredibly difficult to get my pit bull unhooked from his cable and hold on to his collar to drag him back inside the house, because whatever it was, he was ready to tear it apart. So I struggled with him, getting him up the stairs. It took probably all of my body strength that I had just to get him up the stairs, to get him back inside the house. And even after I got him inside, I locked the door. He was still going crazy at the front door, trying to get back out. It was just completely unnerving, because I knew that it definitely was not a man. I didn't know what it was at the time. I didn't know. I'd never heard anything about dogmen at the time. I thought, in my head, I thought maybe I saw a Sasquatch, but the way that the figure was built just wouldn't make any sense with that. That was the end of that particular encounter.
From the way you described this subject when you had first seen it, it sounds like it wasn't hunched over in posture at that point, but later on when you looked at it, you said you noticed it started to hunch. Did that happen in response to your presence, could you tell, or was it something else making it hunch over like that?
Well, at first, when I saw it, it looked like it was standing straight up. Like that was the point where it looked the tallest. While it was standing up like that is when I grabbed my St. Bernard puppy out from under the porch. I got her inside. While I got her inside, my pit bull was still out there just losing his mind and snarling. When I started coming back down the steps to get him, I noticed that it was hunched over, but the way that it was hunched over kind of looked like a football player when they're about to do a play. Hunched over like that is what it looked like. I didn't know if it was going to charge. I wasn't even sure at that point. I didn't really have the time to think about what it was at the time. It was after I got inside when I started wondering what it was. All I knew was that I definitely felt threatened. I was worried for my safety and, of course, my dog's safety. And when it hunched over like that, I thought I got in even more panic mode. I probably had more adrenaline, and that's probably the only reason why I was able to get my pit bull inside, was him being that certain of himself that he was going to break away from me and take off after whatever it was out there.
How far was this subject from your floodlights?
Well, the floodlights shined directly in front of the house, so it lit up the whole front of the house, but off to the side a little bit, it just looks like complete darkness because of all the trees. So it was off to the left side of the house on the gravel road in front of my house, probably 30 feet from where I was, and probably 60 feet from my front door. And I know that because I know how many feet it is from the house to the road. And then I know that he was actually standing on the road, but off to the further side, but he was still on the gravel road. So I know that it was about 30 feet from where I was.
If it was about 30 feet from where you were at that time, at its closest, how close was it?
I would say from where the front porch starts to where the road is about 15 feet. And the road is just big enough just to fit a vehicle on, so I don't know, 6 or 7 feet across. He was off to the side a little bit, but still on that road, 20, 30 feet in between there from where I was standing, and about 60 feet from my front door.
Yeah, that's way too close for comfort right there. So you took the St. Bernard mix and eventually got your pit bull inside the house as well. After you made it in the house with them, what happened next?
Well, as soon as I got into the house, I started wondering what it was, and then I thought, I can't believe, as much as I love my dogs, I thought, I can't believe I went back out there. I was like, I don't know what I was thinking. I, of course, love my animals, but I think just about anybody would tell you that they worry about their safety. It makes it sound like I'm kind of being heartless, but actually I was thinking, I went out there, I went inside with my St. Bernard, I came back out and got my pit bull and dragged him inside, but I was thinking it would have had me long before I could have even got the St. Bernard inside if it wanted to. I just thought, I don't know how I'm going to be able to come home from work and walk from my truck to inside my house and feel okay, feel safe after seeing something like that. I kept wondering what I was going to do about it.
Well, that's understandable. When you know that something like that is outside, it really changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Unfortunately. Were there any other incidents that night, the night that you saw that subject?
It wasn't that night. It was probably a week, maybe 2 weeks later. I'm not really sure how long after that it was. I was coming home from work at 3 o'clock in the morning again. Was going to let my dogs outside. I guess I had told myself, after I'd seen what I saw, I thought, I guess I had talked myself out of thinking I'd seen what I saw. I may have thought to myself, maybe I've been working too much. I was just trying to tell myself that couldn't have happened. I was just trying to talk some sense into myself. But anyway, sometime after that, I come home from work again, 3 o'clock in the morning. I get out of my truck. I walk up the stairs to my porch to unlock the door. When I got up on the steps, the motion detector kicked on. And I had some chairs sitting at the end of my porch. And I noticed something laying there. And I looked at it, and it was a coyote on my porch, just laying on my porch. It didn't make any kind of aggressive move towards me. It acknowledged me. I completely lost my mind, ran back out to my truck, and I called my dad. And I said, Dad, there's a coyote on my porch, and I was about 10 to 15 feet at the most away from it, and it didn't run away. It just looked at me. He was like, well, my goodness, don't get out of the truck. Just try to watch it, and if it gets up and moves away, then try to get inside the house. He was like, but if it's sitting on your porch like that, that's not normal. He was like, there might be something wrong with it. It may have rabies. It may have some sort of disease. So don't take any chances with it. It may try to bite you. We don't know what its problem is. Just stay in your truck. Don't try to go inside, because that means you'll be closer to it. At least you'll be safe in the truck. And I kept worrying about my dogs inside. After I called my dad, I looked behind my truck, and I noticed that we had a city garbage can that we had pushed out to the road that day. It was the day that the trash pickup came. And it was knocked over, and I thought, it's kind of odd, but I was really more worried about the coyote. I was worried about my dogs inside, because I thought, they haven't been outside to do their business in about 6 hours. I was like, I'll just have to deal with the repercussions whenever this thing leaves. Just try to run and take them out as quickly as I can so they can take care of their business, get them back inside. Well, I waited for so long, and the coyote just never moved. I got really tired, and I ended up falling asleep in my truck that night. The next morning, it was gone. The following week after that, I wasn't really worried about the coyote. I thought, if it's sick, if something's wrong with it, it may have been disoriented. It may have just gone back out in the woods to die somewhere, because we know that that's what animals do. So I wasn't too worried about the coyote anymore, and it used to always be my routine when I got off work, let the dogs out, go outside on the front porch and drink a cup of coffee, and even talk on the phone to friends or read a book, something like that, just to unwind. Well, I started hearing what sounded like a baby crying in the woods off to the west of the house, but it sounded like it was in the trees. It sounded like it was coming from above. So I walked to that side of the porch. My dogs were reacting to it, but they weren't barking. They were just looking in that area and not moving at all. It had me so convinced it just sounded like an infant crying out in the woods. And it had had me so concerned that I almost got off of my porch and walked off in there with a flashlight because it just sounded so much like a baby crying, even though that doesn't make any sense for a baby to be out there out in the woods. I didn't go and investigate it, but it stopped after a while. I got the dogs inside. I got ready for bed. Laying in bed for a little bit, and my pit bull starts barking again, but we're inside the house at this point. He crawled up on the bed with me, and there was a window behind my bed, and he was acting like he wanted to come through that window. I could hear what sounded like footsteps. I didn't know it could be a deer or any kind of animal like that, us being pretty much out in the woods like that. But it stopped right next to my window. When it got that close that I could actually hear the footsteps, my dog stopped barking, and he just laid on the bed, and he didn't move at all. And I was thinking, is somebody outside my house? Well, I could hear the crunch of the leaves come up to the window, and it's like it stayed there, or it stopped moving, or it disappeared, because after it got up to my window, I just didn't hear it again.
Did the footsteps sound like they were made by a quadrupedal animal or a bipedal one?
It sounded bipedal because I almost had myself convinced that it was a person because of the way that the footsteps were. At first I thought it might have been a deer until it got closer. If you spent any time out in the woods, you know what it sounds like when you step on leaves and branches and stuff like that. You can tell when something has weight to it and when it doesn't. The way that a deer walks, it doesn't walk as heavy as a larger animal because it has four legs to distribute its weight onto. These sounded like something big. Like someone wearing like huge boots almost is what it sounded like, being outside my window. I didn't see anything. Obviously, I was inside the house, and I definitely wasn't going to roll the blinds up and look outside, but it was enough to disturb me enough that shortly after that I contacted my landlord, and I pretty much convinced him to switch my year lease to a 6-month lease, and I moved out of that area. I moved into the city after that.
I can't say I blame you for moving out of there. You had some pretty strange activity going on there. That coyote that you saw on the front porch, I don't know why, but when dogmen are in the area where coyotes are, coyotes seem to act pretty strange. They do things like that that just defy explanation. No idea what's behind that, but it sure seems to be a pattern, and it seems to be true. Before we get out of here, there's one last incident I wanted to talk about. You mentioned something strange that happened at a liquor store in the area. Please tell us about that.
At the end of Ditto Landing Road, at a cross-section of Ditto Landing Road 231, there is a Windmill Beverages, which is a liquor store, right across from that intersection. And Ditto Landing Road is obviously where the marina is, and it's also a campground, so it's a wooded area, but people drive by there fairly regularly. But anyway, it was like a flash on the news that a couple had seen what looked like a bear in the dumpster at Windmill Beverages. But where the dumpster was off to the side of the back of the building. The security cameras are only faced out directly in front of the building, so it wasn't caught on camera. They said that they had seen what looked like a bear in the dumpster. The way that the street lights were, or the parking lot lights were, they didn't go off to the side of the building. They were just in the front, just like the security cameras. So I drove by there just to check it out, and I noticed that the way that the dumpster was has one of those doors on the side that you can slide open or close so you could throw trash bags in there. And then at the top, it's got one of those, I guess, plastic or fiberglass lids that when the trash comes to pick it up, they just dump it and it just automatically opens. Well, the way that the side door was, how tall it was, came up to my shoulder. I'm about 5'5", so it's pretty high up off the ground. That's where the bottom of the sliding door came to. They said that they had seen a bear in that dumpster, but nobody could believe it because there are definitely no bear in this area. The closest place that I know for sure of bear being reported was up well into Tennessee, which would probably be 2 to 3 hours from here at least. And so I just found it really odd that they would say that they had seen a bear in that area, and not only that, but on a main highway.
Yeah, that is kind of strange. Since no one was able to identify what it was, I guess we'll never know, but it sure does make you wonder. Well, Christian, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yes, actually, I do. I would just like to let people know, if you go out into the woods, you spend any time out in the wilderness, you need to keep your wits about you. You need to pay attention to stuff, like all of your surroundings, because you just really never know what is out there. And if something was to be stalking you or following you, it's going to do whatever it can to be as stealthy as possible and to not be detected. But you need to definitely keep your wits about you and pay attention to the small details, because that could be something that you could definitely have going for you in your favor in that type of situation. At least be aware of your surroundings.
Well, that's really good advice. Christian, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show here tonight. I really do appreciate it.
It was good to be here, Vic.
Oh, it was great talking with you. Have a great night, okay?
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. If you've had a dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.